I mean, I tried 3 times. Unless you wanted me to do that for like the people in real time who see these, like I just don't. I don't know what that. It's not really working out. I don't know what the yellow numbers mean. I don't. I'm just telling things that your people like your friend know, but like people know them. Trying to tell it with like but it's a short. You have a time limit, and there's you just I don't know what to do. I don't even know if I'm talking the way you would talk about something like that. I mean, I just you seem to want it, and I was that's I want to do what you want me to do. I don't want to be in pain by being out of step. But how do you present that information when you're like my age and you don't really you're talking about things happening to other people? Really, what do I mean? How do I tell that? None of it sounds right. I'm not. It's why I don't teach anywhere. I don't know how to play the role of like telling people things going on they may already know about. I don't know. When I became aware of those things, I said, "Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense." The people like me that business would did that or has been doing that the whole century. But I'm saying it only makes sense because of the sector people like me come from. When you find something like that, you like figures the corporations did it on the right intentionally. Okay, but the two facts are tried again. I don't know. They don't teach it in the school. I mean, they don't teach people how our society functions or why there's no work or why it looks like the depression for most people. I mean, there's like people in my sector, and then there's just what looks like the Dust Bowl, unemployed people, homeless people increasing. There's no work. The only jobs I mean, it's like it's a terror. It's terrible to see the country have gone like that. Why wouldn't they teach it in universities or certainly in economics classes how this all works, where we are, and how the sector that owns a society and how they actually. It's funny is at university they love talking about what they call like anti-corporate things, but they always talk about that like they're ripping out the consumer and it's greed. That's like vague and abstract and just like, yeah, of course people are greedy who want to make a lot of money, but that doesn't tell you what happened to the country. It's like people just, I don't know, people don't know what happened here. Why is it like this now? And that story, that news channel and the old labor secretary on, right, I mean, something no student would be taught, and even in economics classes it's not taught. The history of our American economy and how this finally got like this. One prompt was about about automation, the history of how a lot of jobs were replaced by like robots and stuff. That happened a long time ago. And then the thing where we lived, or people happened in my lifetime, the total like leaving of high paying like factory jobs and stuff all over to high repression areas or places where people will work for like no money. All that kind of thing that wrecked our economy, it's told in the liberal universities and economics classes, and told in what's told is it's in book after book that are bestsellers on the New York Times. Like people don't know about economics, they I'll read this book and it'll tell me how this all happened. Oh, it's globalization. Like, oh yeah, I don't know. I guess that's why it's like this. No, that's not why it's like this. But the two things about the history of automation. And then this guy who was a labor secretary when all the, factory works and production jobs and things left the country, and then by that's immoral, get banged up people in places with dictators. But it's how that stuff happened and how it always has been happening that like they're not taught because like I don't know, the professors are children, or they don't want people to know, or they think if people knew there'd be like patriot movements or something, where they just keep it a secret and not tell people about that. But there are studies on it, but it's not in the graduate schools they don't tell people that. In the economics classes it's not taught. It isn't. The two facts are this: the whole thing that what started in the back, I guess in the 70s, started in the 70s, automation. The sudden people, oh, it's a ways of the future. Like robots can do work that people were making high wages, had health benefits, and tons of people and a strong union asked for that. All right, and then some technology came. It's just like the market and like technology marching on and like automated out like a lot of workers. They're replaced by a robot. Right. The history of that is like a good example of how our how our business class and that sector actually does its game, like what they've been doing in our society, which is that. But automation is a good example of this kind of thing. That it did not happen through the free market. It did not happen because of technology marching on. It was not done through the market. It was developed like, everything else is sort of. It was developed for no other reason. It's incredibly expensive things to do. It took a state subsidy. Corporations use state subsidies to all this technology to be developed at MIT. Like, can we replace human beings with robots? Why would you do an incredibly expensive thing that has to get a state subsidy? Why would corporations do that? Because they did it because it was a good idea of waging class war against the rest of the society that isn't their own corporations. It was developed with the idea this would be a good weapon of class war. As we start automating factories, if we can lower wages, we can, not pay, we can do whatever we want, because now if anyone attempts to organize or says they want, we can just, they'll just make them aware of all the factories where people have been fired and they've been replaced with robots. But it was developed with state subsidy, because the state and corporations know that's a good way of waging war against workers. So that's how that happened, and eventually, but that's why it was developed. And it was not developed due to market. It was developed through state subsidy, because corporations work directly with with the state and develop technologies like that, only as a weapon of class war against everybody else. That was prompted by a story about Amazon developing futuristic technologies for a publicity stunt. But people aren't taught that that's how it works. The recent one is the recent history of what actually happened, that all, this new kind of economic integration, where apparently all the high-paying jobs in production and factories and all that just left the country, and now they're in places where people have guarded by people with machine guns, and they're paid poverty wages. That also is not the market, and it's wisdom that just causes all this, now it's the depression for most people. No, that also what they did at first was this: pour money. Corporations started pouring money into something that doesn't make much sense when you hear it at first. Building excess capacity, building empty factories all over the world, like an empty factory in Mexico, just a giant factory that's empty. Why would they start doing that? Harms their profits, dumping money into empty factories, because it was done. It's a good investment in waging class war against the rest of the society. Then finally in the 90s, 90% of the attempts of workers to organize when wages were going down and the money was losing value, 90% of the attempts to organize were just stopped by the threat by owners of moving production overseas. Just show them, but just, make the workers aware of all the empty factories ready to have peasants who are desperate for money. It's ready to go if you strike. 90% of the attempts to organize were stopped by the threat of moving production. They've been building factories, incredible amount of money to build factories all over, but it was a good investment because it would be a weapon of class war against the rest of the population. And that's how it happened. None of these things happen through the market. What we have is the corporate sector what they do all the time and have been doing, and how they operate is they are always coming up with things to wage class war against everyone else. You're taught in the universities that class struggle, that's something poor people do, or that's something the workers do. Sure, they do. There's a history of it. But it's not taught that our corporate sector in strategic alliance and all working with state subsidy with things are constantly coming up with ways of waging class war, that they wage class war against the rest of society. That's not taught. It's not explained to people in economics classes that that's how our society functions. All you get to know is I don't know, it's just the market and greed wrecked the whole country, and now it's the Dust Bowl, and people are desperate, and people are on food stamps you never thought they would be. Lines around soup kitchens, people living in the street. No one teaches young people coming in our wrecked country. It was an ongoing effort by our corporations using as much as state subsidy when possible to just wage class war. And it's been going on the whole century, and it finally wrecked the whole economy. That's what's not told. That what the business class in our society does that they don't do in any other civilized country, just wage war against the poor and the working class. They're just coming up with ways to wreck the rest of the society. A very small group. Our corporations, that's, percentage wise, that's not, most of the people are not in that sector. That's the last time I'll try to make this, because you guys want a video about this, but I don't know. I don't know.